Good day, everyone. On behalf of the Innovation Institute for Fan Experience, a warm welcome to all our listeners from around the world. We've got another terrific forum today as we explore how leaders in stadium and event management have been managing COVID-19 risks. Today's discussion is actually the third installment of a series we've called the Coronavirus Risk Playbook, a now four-part series created by the IIFX Medical Task Force. The series is designed to explore how the sports and entertainment communities are responding to the pandemic. We're still planning our fourth installment and welcome your comments on topics you would find helpful, particularly related to risk for fans. Please feel free to put those in the Q&A function. Next week, we'll plan to adjust our usual schedule to Thursday instead of Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Time in the United States due to the Veterans Day holiday. And it's worth noting that anyone who registers for one of the four sessions is automatically registered for the others that follow this session. I'm Dr. Till Jolly, the Chief Medical Officer for Aveshka and your moderator for this forum. Aveshka Consulting is powering this series. Each week, the series will bring subject matter expert leaders together to focus on current and emerging health and medical risks in sports and entertainment for venues, athletes, performers, fans, vendors, and staff. Before we get started, a couple of simple housekeeping things. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on our Return to Work, Play, and Spectate podcast, now available on Apple, Spotify, and Google. A video of the session will also be available across our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube channels, and at IIFX_global. You're welcome to ask questions using the Q&A feature in Zoom, which is located on the bottom right of your screen. You're invited to participate in any polls we do. When a poll is open, you'll have up to 2 minutes to complete the poll. The results of this anonymous poll will be visible to everyone. Again, thank you for participating in this webinar. We think you'll find it informative, timely, and useful as you plan to return to work, play, and spectate. As everyone knows, COVID-19 has brought unprecedented pressures and challenges to everyone in society, with particular concern for the sports and entertainment industry, both in managing venues, managing events, planning for the now, and planning for the future. Currently, internationally, I'm not going to share a bunch of slides and numbers and data. You see those all over the news every day. But last week, interestingly, we heard a presentation from our colleagues at Wembley Stadium, which was very well received. During that presentation, France and Germany announced new restrictions to stop disease spread. Currently, much of Europe is experiencing rising cases, including those two countries, along with the UK, Italy, Spain, Poland, and others. The healthcare system's under stress in those countries. In the United States, we're also experiencing a rise in cases in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Montana, and many other states, including many in the Midwest. And the healthcare system is beginning to feel stress again, as we did in the spring. We're likely to continue seeing up and down trends in the coming months. And while this is difficult to manage, we have strategies that can work to try to slow the spread of the disease and get us all back to activities we like, including attending events. Today, we're going to hear from some experts who are working every day to get us back to these events. Our panelists today are well known to many of you. Jim Mercurio is Executive Vice President and General Manager for the San Francisco 49ers. Jeff Steele is Associate Athletic Director for Facilities and Operations at Auburn University in the Athletics Department. Joe Lewis is CEO of the Joe Lewis Company. And Rob Need is team physician for the Golden State Warriors, among a number of other roles he has in the medical community in the San Francisco area. I'm now going to turn it over to Jim to lead off our discussion to talk a bit about what he's managing in the Bay Area. And then we'll go to our others for presentations. And then try to have a discussion that hopefully will include all of you in the Q&A function. Jim, over to you.
Dr. Tilley, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Mercurio. I'm actually Executive Vice President, General Manager at Levi Stadium, which is the home of the San Francisco 49ers, located in actually Santa Clara, California. I'm sorry I didn't catch that, Till, but I'm proud to be with you today. As I sit here with you, we are we are going through a situation where one of our players actually just tested positive. It just was announced today. So while I'm doing this is actually, we're going through our own policies and procedures as we go through our infectious disease emergency response planning. We have a game Thursday night, and so those protocols are in place. But today, what I wanted to talk to you about was what we're doing in preparation to get fans back in the building. Some of you may know in Santa Clara, it's almost a little bit of a hub of some of the COVID-19 early cases that took place in the Bay Area. We have a governor that had just recently declared that we could go into the next phase, which would allow fans into the facility. And then shortly thereafter, the community, the local county suggested, no, we're not ready to do that quite yet. So we are in a holding pattern as to whether or not we can have fans in and around the stadium at this time. So right now we are managing a facility that does not allow fans into the stadium. Some of the things that I will talk to you a little bit about is, though, as we prep for that, we still have many factors that require us to get the stadium ready. Almost 1,000 people, regardless of whether or not we have fans that are still working in and around the facility. And some of the things that I'll talk to you a little bit about is what maybe you might not take for granted with respect to those employees. The first thing I would tell you is, as we prepped to get this stadium open for the NFL season, was the amount of new signage that needed to get propped up throughout the facility, and how you communicate what it is those expectations are with respect to how you communicate that. So throughout the entire stadium, we've got our IPTV system that communicated where and what it is that those expectations are. And so how you communicate that to our customers or eventual customers or our internal customers, which is our fans, or excuse me, which is our employees, was extremely important. The second thing I'll tell you is, don't take for granted that your employees are going to be ready, willing, and able to come back to the facility if and when you invite them back to it. This is an ever-changing scenario, and I think in some of those cases, taking it for granted that employees are comfortable to go back in place, despite the fact that you're putting PPE and all the necessary protocols in place, that they're going to be comfortable to go back into work. And so those are some of the things that I would talk to you a little bit about today, and answer any questions that you might have with that respect. And then lastly, what we really had to do is take the facility and isolate it into 2 or 3 different tiers. The first tier, and it's working by way of my earlier announcement today, that we've got one of our players that have just recently tested positive. We're able to isolate those folks from a contract tracing perspective to identify, okay, what is our actual concern now with respect to that player, and who has that player interacted with within that tier or that quote unquote bubble. And so we established with the NFL an IDER plan, which is an infectious disease emergency response plan. And in that plan, it talked about making sure you're able to isolate different groups of people. And by virtue of that, it started with identifying who actually needed to be around the entertainment, or who needs to be around the players, or who needs to be around that talent, who really needs to be in that group. And you got to start and make some real tough decisions. And the first one that was easy for me was, I really don't need to be a part of that. Though I am the executive VP and general manager of the building, I don't need to be in the locker room as often as, say, a medical provider or a team doctor, trainer, or equipment manager, so to speak. And so you got to look internally to see whether or not you actually and who actually needs to be a part of that. As a result of that, you're able to now take those numbers and keep them as tight as possible. The next tier is who are the support staff that need to go in and out of those spaces, and when they can go in and out of those spaces. The third tier, might be, other stadium food and beverage operators, things of that nature, who don't necessarily need to be in that interaction as much as you might see a team physician, trainer, or equipment manager. As a result of those 3 tiers, we then can have a better opportunity to move forward in any investigations that you have in the event, or in the, I'll even say likely event, that you have a positive test somewhere along the line. It allows us now to go quickly move into our protocols to make sure that we isolate those folks and then move to the next stage. As we sit today, we think the game is going to go move forward this Thursday night. So I'm not breaking any news on this conference call today or the Zoom call, but I am suggesting to you that these are the protocols that we do put in place, and we're prepared to be nimble, which would be the last point that I think I'll make, is with respect to this virus and the needs to be able to operate within it. You do have to be nimble. You have to be you have to be able to adjust on the fly. And at all times, you got to make sure that you are communicating as best as you can to not just your team and your employees, but to your customers, your media, and at some point in time to your fans. Till, I'll leave it at that. And if there's any other questions that you might have, we can move forward to any other presentations that we might have.
Thanks. Very good, and obviously very timely given what you've got going on in your life today. So yeah, that you kind of can't make this stuff up.
Yeah.
Jeff, Jeff, I'll turn to you now to talk a bit about your experience at Auburn.
You bet, Dr. Jolly. Thank you so much. A little bit about our facility. We are an 89,000 seat stadium situated on a college campus in the southeastern United States. So we're right in smack dab in the middle of campus. We have 14 other athletic facilities that we're responsible for. But primarily today, we want to talk about our stadium. Unlike Jim, we are already hosting events and we have fans in our stands. We work through all of the processes, which we'll discuss. And right now we have 20% capacity, about 22% capacity inside our stadium. We've hosted 3 events so far in the stadium and can share with you kind of how that's gone and some of our success stories. We're very fortunate in that our numbers, we had a spike when we saw the college students come back on campus in early September. Our season was adjusted, games were reduced, and we targeted to start about 5 weeks ago in early October. And so we had lots of adjustments that were made to get there. Now, how do we get there? We have 5 separate medical groups that we're working with: state, local health departments, the conference medical team, the campus medical team, and then our departmental medical team. So they kind of drove the train on what our processes and procedures were and where our standards were going to be set in our operational plan. The state has the heaviest hand in that. They have ultimate authority. But we were very, very fortunate that all 5 of those entities worked very closely together to set standards for us that we felt like we could achieve. And those include all of the things like social distancing, temperature checks, health checks, and all of those things. Jim's spot on signage. Signage, we had to try to get out in front of that very quickly of what was applicable, and then where we would put it and how we would put it. Communication is huge, and Jim brought that up initially, and that's huge. That's in communication with those groups that are setting those standards, and communicating to your staff, communicating to your talent, your student athletes, your coaches, communicating to donors, communicating to students. Communications is huge in how you're doing this, because ultimately, to start back up and get going again, everything about our operation had to be looked at. And we had almost a total and complete transformation of the way we operate. And to do that, you got to be able to communicate, and people have to understand you can't operate the way that you used to. Things change, and we have to change, and we have to be able to meet those challenges head on if we're going to open up and if we're going to have fans back in the stands, which is key for us. So from the outset, our standards were set by our medical teams, and we began to work how we would put people in the stands and how we would put fans in the stands. And so you have all those policies and procedures that go into place to prepare your facility. And Jim's exactly right. We have a 3-tiered system as well. We have that inner bubble for the teams and the coaches and the folks on the field. And that is a very, very, very tightly controlled. Jim made the point that, he doesn't need to be in the locker room. He doesn't need, all of the spaces that I used to be in on game day, I'm no longer in anymore. I don't stay in those spaces because I don't need to. Now, if I have to go, I have the ability to go, but I don't go. Anybody in that first tier bubble has to be tested 3 times in a week. The first test is on Wednesday, the second test is on Friday, and the third test is a rapid test that is taken just prior to entering the facility. So 3 separate tests for that first bubble. That second bubble is our fence line, and where people are there, that's a lot of concessions and catering and a lot of the stadium operations people. We require all of those people to complete a health check. You can see my screen here. I don't know if you can see it, but you have to go in on the web base. It's web based, so you can do it on your phone, and you answer health questions. We require everybody's temperature to be reported. We have a piece of this program that has some contact tracing in it. That's a part of it. And everybody that works in the stadium and accesses the stadium, including our fans, have to complete that prior to entering. And then on game day, we're using walk-through metal detectors, and so you have that piece that's in place, and then you have the health check and you have the temperature checks. We segmented the stadium by colors, by zones, and each parking lot. So when you came into the parking lot, you parked in the green parking lot, you entered the green gates, you sat in the green sections, and by doing that, we were able to control our flow of fans. At the same time, we gave you a orchestrated window to park. We gave you an orchestrated window to enter the gates, so that we were able to control the flow of fans. Masks are required, and that has been a challenge. First week, we had no problems with it. The last 2 weeks, we've had some problems with it. And so, but we've addressed those. We're very fortunate in that people have social distance and for the most part have followed all of our protocols. So we're very fortunate in that. A report just came out today on campus. We only had 8 new cases on a campus of 30,000 students. We only had 2 university staffers out of about 20,000 employees. So our numbers are very fortunate. We're going to knock wood. Our numbers are down, and so it really is because I think our folks are doing what they need to do to stay safe. I saw the question pop up about temperature checks. We looked into a temperature check program that could be attached to our walk-through metal detectors, and we were starting that process. Our administration said, "Well, we don't think we're going to do temperature checks," and so we backed off of that, and we kind of focused our efforts on some other areas. About 10 days out of the season, the administration came back and said, "We want temperature checks for everybody." So we had to put in place a system to be able to temperature check not only the staff, but also our fans. And so what we did is we placed temperature check stations outside the gates. And when people came in, they were required to complete their health check. When they got to the temperature check station, we used just a regular touchless thermometer to test their temperature and to give it to them. And then they had to go to the gate and show their green screen to get into the stadium. And you know, we've also, and then you have to worry about your staff. And so we set up a system where we rotate those that are testing temperatures out every 15 minutes. And so their exposure is limited. We've given them gloves, we've given them masks, we've given them face shields, all of those things. In some places where we have a high concentration of folks coming in, we actually have plexiglass stations with a hole in the system so that they can take the temperature. So we've tried to take those steps to be as proactive as possible to protect our staff and our fans. And we've been very fortunate so far that those things have worked.
Thanks very much. You know, that's great information. We're getting pretty active questioning. I do want to remind everybody that we've got a chat function. We're watching it. It's a little tough to watch. If you can also try to use the Q&A function, we can map the questions and make sure we get answers to all of them. So that's preferred. So, but we'll certainly manage all this. So those are great presentations from 2 people who manage stadiums in quite different environments. One in a professional environment that also hosts other events. One on the middle of the college campus in a college environment that's now hosting fans with their own pressures and constant changes, as you've already heard. Next, I'm going to turn to Joe to talk a bit about what he's looking at from his standpoint based on his experience and what his company does in the entertainment industry. Joe?
Thanks, Till. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. To start off, I'll first say that I agree with what both the gentleman before me, Jim and Jeff, said, in that it's all about communication, it's all about proper signage, and it's all about being nimble and fluid. It is absolutely paramount that you go into this with a playbook but be ready to take that playbook and put X's and O's all over it, if you will, and be ready to pivot. So I would agree with them both there. Just a little bit about us. I run a live event production company. Up till March the 9th, we were doing about 250 projects a year around the United States and in the Middle East, Northern Africa region. I am annually part of the Super Bowl, the Academy Awards, the Grammys, the Oscars, any big live television special in the United States. I would say the big tent poles we are a part of or have been a part of. So I'm able to sit in the chair both on the event production side, but as well as the broadcast side. I produce the Academy Awards, the live television show, and the Grammys for the network. So I'm one of those. I sit on that side, but I also sit on the event side, which gives us a very unique perspective into the way forward, if you will, and how we need to deal with COVID to get people back in seats and to get people back to work. And the one thing I'll say is that we can put all the plans in place that you want to, but people have to feel comfortable about A, showing up for work, and B, showing up to spectate. And one of the things we figured out quickly that we needed to do is we needed to find a mechanism to communicate. And so myself and 4 other companies, we started an organization called EIR, Entertainment Industry Response. That took 5 like-minded companies. We came up with a COVID compliance team that we could take to productions and live entertainment to show them a way to get back to work. We launched that in March. By June, we were doing 45 jobs a month. And we've seen a little downtick now based on what's going on in the country and the time of the year, but we are servicing live episodic television events. The one thing we found that really needed to be done before you got out on site was we needed to communicate what the plan was so that there's no surprises. Signage is great. Communications are great, setting up zones are great, but you really need to let both the client, the venue, and the workers and the talent know what your plan is so that they walk in and they understand what you're doing. We, as an organization, we follow CDC, WHO, OSHA, EPA guidelines. When we are writing these guidelines, the one thing we are careful not to say is that this is not best practices. These are merely practices that we are putting in place based on the information we have at this current time. Because if we are doing a project, what might work in Jim's venue will not work in Jeff's venue, and vice versa, right? Because of the zone and the area and the region that you're in. The other thing we've learned is that we really need to go in and be the authority, right? And I'm going to use authority loosely because depending on where you are, the authority is the health department, right? We have found that the health departments really only want to focus on what letter you have in your window. Are you an A, B, or C restaurant? Do you have rodents? And what is are you changing use of your venue? They are not prepared, like the rest of the country, they are not prepared to really intelligently answer the questions around COVID. So we've put together a plan. We present a plan, processes and protocols, which I will share with you, that we present to the city, we present to the health department, and we present to the client and venue. Here's what our plan is, and here's what our guidelines are. give us your interpretation of this. And we've had a lot of success with this. So I'll share my screen. So I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'll just give you the highlights of this. So this was for the iHeartRadio Music Festival. Safety Plan, Policy, and Procedures. This is the organization I launched. And inside of this document, it gives you everything from your key context to describing what the bubble is in our scenario, to your zones, which is very similar to your tiers, Jim, that you mentioned, Zone A, and Jeff, you mentioned this too. Zone A, we test 3 times a week. The testing week begins the first day you test. So if you're not on site shooting until Monday, but you test everyone on Sunday, that is day 1 of the 7 days for that population of people. Zone B, we test once every 7 days, and the same with Zone C. We go right into explaining about moving between zones. We define what pods are. This informs your audience and informs your participants and informs your venue of what your plan is. So then when you get there, it allows there to be consistency in what the message is. All the way down to the type of disinfecting we're using, what PPE is, what departmental considerations are, meals. So I'll show you a little bit of this. I'll click through this. Here's one. So health and safety measures. Health and safety measures really define, based on the information we gather, how we are going to proceed on and during this particular shoot. Again, this changes based on the region you're in and changes based on the production in the local health departments. The bubble, okay? This will interest some. So the bubble refers to the physical stage in your shooting area, okay? Our bubble, I saw a question. Our bubble does not start in the parking lot. Our bubble starts once you move into the clean zone, okay? Entering the bubble. We put on here because people like to know when does the process start? We believe it starts at home with your first test, okay? Which is 2 to 3 days out before you get to the site, unless you are able to test on site day 1. So we provide them a little roadmap. Here's a little roadmap of what our plan is and what the bubble looks like. I can tell you it's peace of mind for staff, for talent, for management, and for venues when you get on site. The daily experience, okay? We tell them what we're going to do when they get on site. Okay, this is going to be the process. We're setting the expectation for what we're going to be doing. Okay, and then you follow this. Zones and pods. We have found that if you clearly communicate and put this on paper, we also do this digitally. We send this out electronically. We've created an app that we use that reminds people when they need to test their daily screening. Daily screenings and temperature checks are something that happens every day with us. So this is a roadmap of how we are going to work when we get on the job site. Obviously, you have to be fluid and you have to be pretty nimble when you do it, okay? But what this does is this gives everyone peace of mind on what the expectation is. Now, we have seen, if we are going to do a show in Nashville, and we've just worked with guys in Los Angeles, the rules in different cities and states are different, like we spoke about. They will refer back to this document, right? And say, hey, why aren't we doing this in this venue? Why aren't we doing this here? We then get to say that based on the guidelines in this particular city state, these things are not required. Please go talk to your executive producer of why they're not following these guidelines. And that is a reality. When we do things in Florida, the expectation is different than we do here in California. But we try to maintain a baseline of what we're doing and how we're getting back to work. And everyone's pretty appreciative of that. The one thing that is becoming more and more critical in all of this for entertainment is airflow and the MERS rating with air conditioning units. And how are we handling that? And based on the number of talent that are performing in a closed area within a certain square footage, how often is that air exchanging and transferring out? That is something that we've seen in the last 8 weeks really spike up. We've gotten down to now, when we're doing these rehearsals, that every 15 minutes we're clearing the venue, we're changing face masks for these performers and these talent. Something that is really eliminates particular venues that may not have appropriate HVAC in them. And that is becoming such a hot topic in California right now with talent that it's really minimized venues that we can utilize for rehearsals and for performances. So all that to say, communication for us is in a documentation. Giving that documentation to all of the participants via physically or digitally has proven to be the difference maker for us in live entertainment and on jobs where multiple groups of people are moving in and out. We go all the way down into telling them what personal hygiene is, right? Again, all of this, we are physician-led and directed as an organization. All of this information is based on the guidance we've been given and the information we've been given. So we just share it with them so that then there's real accountability in what the expectation is when they get on site. I mean, and some people look at this and go, are we expected to follow all this? No, we ask them to be both practical, reasonable, and pragmatic in their approach. So this is how we are doing it on the entertainment side for jobs that are 10 people and for jobs that are going to be 1,500 people. We are already in conversation about how we're going to handle the Grammys, how we're going to handle the Oscars, how we're going to handle all of these shows that are coming up. How is the broadcast? How is CBS going to handle the broadcast for the Super Bowl? What is that doing? What is that going to look like in Tampa? So these are all conversations that are happening, but everyone's going back to a document like this, which is policies and procedures based on the current information that is available. And that's the key, current information that is available, because it is changing. I mean, we've been in the middle of productions and they change the rules on what, things such as, if you've been around for someone less than 6 feet, more than 10 minutes, right? They changed it to 15 minutes. So the rules are constantly changing and you have to be up to speed on all of this. And we try to put all of that in a document that lives and breathes. And that's been successful for what we're doing in the live entertainment space and crossing over into the live sports space where there's a broadcast.
Thanks very much. That's a great review. I mean, it's interesting. We had 3 different perspectives on 2 different types of open stadiums and different environments, and then a variety of venues and events that, Joe, you deal with. I'm going to turn next to Rob to bring some of the medical and health perspective to what we've heard and then play off some of the key points, because I think there are some common themes developing here. Rob?
Yeah, thanks. That was great, Joe. And I think you hit on one of the key things here, which is there is no best practice, right? There are just practices. And I think Jeff hit on something as well too, which is there are lots of experts. I think Jeff mentioned he has 5 different medical groups between the county public health through his own medical staff that are all experts. He has no shortage of experts. What we all have is a shortage of experience in what actually works and what makes sense. And so these forums, I think, are really important, if only to share what each other are doing and to get some sense of what is working and what isn't. The other thing we have to remember is the lack of a bad experience doesn't prove that things were safe. It only proves the counter negative, right? So in risk management, you always have to think about, did you prove something was safe, which versus I haven't proved it was unsafe yet. And everything we've done so far has really been that. So when we look at fans coming into stadiums, we have some experience now, right? There's a lot of stuff that has happened. And to my knowledge, we don't have any situations yet of a super spreader event. Certainly the NFL has been watching for that. College campuses have been watching for that. Major League Baseball, the Bundesliga. We haven't seen that, but we also haven't really pushed the threshold beyond what our local public health people have offered. So to date, no super spreader events, but we still don't know what's really the safe threshold. The other thing I think we have to remember is the prevalence rate makes a huge difference in all of this. And all 3 of you guys mentioned this idea that where you sit, where your event is happening, is going to be different. You're going to need to have a different plan, a different strategy based on where you are. And I think we need to remember that. The other point that I wanted to make before I go on to a few specific things is just around the science. So there have been probably tens of thousands of studies looking at COVID now. It's sort of unprecedented in what we've learned in the last 8 months. But most of that is cohort studies. They're not great evidence. They're not randomized controlled trials. You just simply can't do that in this environment. When you have a potentially deadly disease with no treatment, you can't give people it and then see what happens. So these are all real world experiences that we're having to accumulate. The other problem we're having is that most of the information that's coming out, a lot of these studies are coming out pre-print, meaning they don't go through the usual peer review process. So we think we get a lot of evidence, but we're still kind of going by the seat of our pants on a lot of these things. So everything that I say has to be qualified and under that. But we do think we've learned a lot about how the virus is transmitted, what are the risky situations, and what can you do to mitigate that risk. So I want to make a couple of points, and I'm going to focus less on the individual risk that was brought up, that you need the individual fan coming has to make their own risk assessment in coming. And I'm also not going to talk about the talent or the athletes, the bubble. I think we've talked about that a little bit in the past. Joe, a lot of your protocol was around that. And we may do another one as a forum where we specifically talking about setting up a bubble or the fans experience. So I want to focus a little bit on what do we think we know about people coming into the arena or into the to the stadium. And most of you in the audience, I'm going to assume, have had some expertise in this and also understand the language of COVID. So I will talk fast over that, and feel free to put that in the Q&A if you need to. So the first thing I was going to bring up is understanding the prevalence rate in your area. So the higher the prevalence rate, obviously, the greater the risk that you encounter in the stadium setting. There is a risk calculator that Georgia Tech has put out where you can put in your local county rate, how many people are in your venue, and other variables, and it will give you the likelihood that you have an asymptomatic infectious person in your space. It is not worth doing at this point, because no matter what you put in the current state in America, it will come back 100%. So you have to assume right now that there will be asymptomatic infectious people in your audience. So what can you do to mitigate the risk of transmission? So masks are probably the most important thing you can do. There are hundreds of studies looking at masks. I'm happy to go into the details of them offline or in the question and answer, but the bottom line is they are the most effective thing we probably have in a closer setting. In fact, probably more effective if used appropriately than even a vaccine will be. You know, the CDC director, Robert Redfield, said before Congress that masks will be more effective than a vaccine. So we can get into those details, but you can't get away from that. Jeff and Jim, you guys might end up coming back and talking about how do you enforce having the mask. I think that's a whole nother story, but they need to be part of your plan. There's a lot of talk about temperature checks and all the hygiene, all of the cleaning. There's really no evidence out there that that makes a big difference at this point. So I know we get caught up sometimes on what's the temperature screen. Does it make sense to do it? Yeah, obviously, one in the mouth is the most accurate, but we're not going to be doing that for fans coming into the arena. The thermal scanners that they use in airports, that's what we use in our hospital systems, are actually quite effective at capturing people who have an elevated temperature, but they're really expensive. And so they may not be a solution either. But the bottom line on temperature checks is it's really a signal. It says we're taking this seriously. We want you to take this seriously. We are doing what we can to keep things safe. And I'm also talking specifically to fans coming into your space, not necessarily to your employees. So your employees and staff who are there on a daily basis, temperature checks that you can do in a really well fashion might still make a lot of sense. But for the fans coming in, I am unaware either in our hospital setting or, I asked Jeff about what they're doing at Auburn, and they have yet to have a positive where you really caught someone who was infectious and you needed to turn away. So I wouldn't get too caught up on how accurate the temperature is in this particular setting. Physical distancing is the next most important thing that you can do. If you go beyond 25% capacity, it's going to be very hard. And I leave it to Jim and Jeff to talk more about how do you do that. Plexiglass, entrances that are assigned to specific groups of people. How do you prevent congregation during your egress? How do you deal with the bathrooms? Those are all obviously things you need to think about. But once you start getting beyond 25% capacity, it's going to be very hard to do those things in a stadium setting. And if you get into an indoor setting, then you also are starting to think about what's your ventilation and airflow. Now, most of big arenas like we have at Chase, a lot of airflow. The whole air turns over 4 times an hour. So high volume ventilation, it's probably okay from a ventilation standpoint. But if you're in a smaller venue, you're at a smaller campus, excuse me, you're in a small old gymnasium, I think that's going to be a little bit more of a challenge, which gets to my last point, which is testing. So as Joe pointed out, and I think Jeff, you talked a little bit about this too, we are testing the talent, we are testing the athletes, we're testing our staff. Excuse me. I think if we're going to get to more higher capacity stadiums in our current environment with the prevalence rate we have, we're going to need to start thinking about doing testing for our fans. And that if you are a professional team, maybe there's a pathway to get there. If you're a small D3 college, there probably isn't, unless you're on campus and the campus is testing. So Columbia is testing all their students. Wisconsin is testing their students. Colorado is testing their students. So that may be the way you have to leverage it, or working in conjunction with your public health. Public health would love it if a private enterprise could come in and start testing, doing surveillance testing of their audience. So with that, Till, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks. All great points. And I think this is a group that's there's some differences, but there are lots of commonalities. I think one of them, and I want to explore a little bit, is related to the communications, that the how you put signage together, but more importantly, how you what you've dealt with and maybe what didn't work in messaging, and any conflicts that you have. Conflict may not be the right word, but conflicts in messaging between what you're asking people in your venue to do and what they maybe are being told or asked to do outside your venue. And it comes down at kind of the micro level to maybe somebody who doesn't want to wear a mask and convincing them to wear one. But then at the macro level, groups getting together and even your interaction with local authorities. So let's explore the communications a little bit more. I'm happy to turn to anyone. We'll go to Jim first, I guess.
Yeah, Till, I'd be happy to take that. I think there's a couple things that we looked at. The moment we first started to identify what the plan was in terms of what actual signage that we needed to, what message we needed to convey. first it had to, we looked to the NFL to make sure that we are on the same page, right? What we wanted to do as a league, as a member club, it was important that we were communicating a similar messaging. How it looked, how it felt, you can leave it up to your marketing and sales opportunities and how they want to make it look and feel. But you had to identify all the different locations of where you have signage today and where you don't, and what type of signage. Static signage. So we started out in the parking lot. So on game day, we have, I don't know, 30 changeable message boards that we would normally use for in-ground or ingress parking and traffic operations. Well, because we're not having as many fans right now, or having any fans right now, we can pull those units in, and we repurposed those changeable highway message boards into COVID signage boards. Be prepared. Here are the things that you should be prepared for as an employee. And by the way, they're not always your employees, right? You have subcontractors that you got to reach out to, whether it's your food and beverage provider, your security provider, your guest services teams, your ushers, ticket takers, police, for example. And then you got to look at the different types of unions. So make sure that the type of messaging you are sending out is applicable and is enforceable to those different types of groups. So we took that, we took static signage, we looked at flyers, we looked at signage on every single route that a customer and or employee would take from leaving their car to entering the stadium, and everywhere along that route, from the security checkpoint to the elevators and escalators that you would take, or your ramps that you would get, there would be signage placed in those areas, to the restrooms on the mirrors, to the IPTV system, which is all your TVs around the entire stadium, changing those out to where you would normally use those as a game presentation. Some of those are now turned to rotational signs, just to give people the reminder that when it's time to enforce the policy of a face mask, as Rob talked about, you can't use the excuse, "Oh, I never saw your sign." The signs that we will give to an usher who is asked to enforce the mask or facial covering policy will be a sign they hold, so they don't have to communicate or get too close to somebody to maintain that social distancing. Will be important for you to consider. The message boards that you have around your facility should be repurposed to showcase your messaging platform. So all of those, you almost got to rethink about your days of either first opening the stadium for the first time as a new stadium, or what a lot of you do for the first event of the year, of dusting off all your policies and procedures and going through all of your new items. You should take a fresh look at what it would take to open up the building for the first time in a long time, because that's essentially what a lot of us are doing.
Great, Jeff. You've got people, now got fans in your venue. So what have you learned from that?
Yeah, we built on all of the things that Jim talked about in the way of signage, and where Jim worked with the NFL, we work with campus, and so all of our campus signage is alike. So when you're anywhere on campus, whether it's in an athletic facility or whether it's in a campus building, they all match and they all mean the same thing, which kind of sends that uniform message. We went very strong as well on social media communication. We did a YouTube video. We multiple tweets to all of our folks, emails and email blasts, any way we could communicate to get the message before they got there, that this was the way it was going to be. These are the steps you're going to take, so that the young folk, as well as those that maybe are older like me, don't quite use some of those, get the message across the board. So we try to use as many media as possible, newspaper articles. Our basketball coach is very, very popular. And so, we had him go out, gave him some talking points, and then had him go out and do interviews and sort of walk people through what's expected and to be safe, and to, because he's a respected figure and he's our basketball coach and very popular. Fans were very very interested in hearing him talk, and they were willing to listen to the message a little more. So it's really important to build off that communication piece across all mediums and try to reach out to every one of your individuals. We've had 3 games. I told you initially, we had very little problem with social distancing, very little problem with masks as time has gone on, and we've gotten that fatigue now. The last event we had a week ago, we had some instances where we had to go down and tell folks, hey, separate. And we had to go tell some folks, look, put your mask on, or you're going to be asked to leave. Working all those things out, Jim brought it up, working all those things out ahead of time. Our law enforcement didn't want to be masked police. And so we had to work that out in advance of how we were going to address that and how we were going to, because at some point you may have to get them involved if you're ejecting someone from your facility. So, and for the first time in a long time, we laid out to our folks, look, these are the requirements to attend the game. This isn't a right, this is a privilege. And so these are rules you have to follow, just like all the other common rules that you have for decorum inside our facility. You're gonna have to follow these if you're gonna stay here. So that communication piece is huge, particularly when you're talking about getting folks to do things they're not used to doing in an environment where they're used to relaxing and just sort of enjoying the moment, where they have to think a little differently.
Great. And I'm going to turn this around a little bit, Joe, given your kind of unique insight being in kind of more than one geographic location. I will note that in the chat, there's a question to Rob about an article on CNN that refers, I think, to an article in one of the medical journals. And, back to Rob's point of thousands of articles being published, we're all trying to keep up with those things, but lots out there. But Joe, the communications is obviously important. Jeff and Jim both mentioned dealing with different authorities with different roles and responsibilities, different medical teams, different rules, county versus state. You're dealing across multiple jurisdictions. What are you learning from that? What are you seeing? And how do you manage that when you pop in and out of various locations?
The first thing we have to do is you need to find out what county you're going into, right? Because everyone's rules on what a hot spot is different. Like in LA County, it's 3 per 100. If you've got 3 positives per 100, it needs to be reported beyond the CDC and becomes a hot spot. It gets reported beyond the health department to the CDC, and then they could shut you down. I would say across the board, the role of the health departments, once we report to them, what they do with that information, I don't care where we've been, I think it goes into a black hole, honestly. We report, we follow up to get, record of what they've done with that information, or if they knew, they don't know. I'm not real sure what they're doing with it. I would say, Jeff, you mentioned your state troopers wearing face masks. We have on our shows, when the city, the fire department, the police in LA County or in Nashville, Tennessee, or in Miami, Florida, when they show up, they come in, they are 90% of the time unmasked, and the words out of their mouth is, if we don't come in, we will shut you down. And you just look at them like, really? You're asking everyone else to abide by this and you're not going to do it? And I've literally had those conversations with them. And, we've been around long enough. I'll just tell him I'm going to call you a battalion chief and see what he thinks. But it is, depending on where you are, no one's aligned. There's no clear communication. There's no clear protocol. The wearing a mask seems to be universal now. Everyone's starting to buy into that. But what happens beyond that mask and what people can and can't do, there's no consistency. There's no consistency. The consistency is, if we show up on a job site, then our rules are always the same. But there's no consistency across state lines, not even across counties. I mean, what we can do in downtown Los Angeles, what we can't do in downtown Los Angeles, our friends at the Rose Bowl are waving the flags. Come here, we're going to allow you to do that. So the same, yeah. So the same, and Jim, it's happening in your. I still owe you a phone call. It's happening in your town.
Well, I was just going to say, for that, it's for that reason, the piece of advice that I might leave the group with is, it is very important that you have and develop as good of a relationship with all facets of that health department, local, county, state, because there are so many reasons why they're not necessarily, Joe, across the, we can't even agree, politically across the country. You're not going to agree in the science community either. I mean, and science is always changing. So I think for that reason, it's important that everybody has to develop as good of a relationship as you can with your agencies, and do everything you can to align them, right? In some cases, they don't know your business. So it's important for you to help them know what it is that you will do and commit to what it is that you will do. And lastly, I would say you got to lead by example, because the last thing you want to do is say you're going to do all these things and then not enforce them. And you're putting somebody in a very difficult spot when a call is lodged or a complaint is lodged to local health department. They have a duty to respond and act on it. So you got to develop those relationships on all levels, and then you got to do what you say and say what you mean. But you got to act upon what you say you're going to do in your plan.
And you need to go in and be an authority. You have to have the confidence to go in and know that your game plan, this is what we're doing, and challenge them to question that game plan as to why, right? I mean, we when we created that document and we walked that document in and we had a plan, if you've got a plan and you show them you're willing to work with them and this is what and you're flexible, it is a key indicator that you're buttoned up and you have a plan, and now you're not trying to put that plan in place on the day. You've got a plan, and then you're willing to be flexible in how do we make it work for the situation you're in. So it's always changing.
Great. We're running toward the end of our time here, but I do want to give everybody, I'm going to start, I think, with Rob, and then the operators to give sort of a final 30-second thought on sort of the major point you'd like to leave the audience with. And then I'll close with a couple of final little housekeeping things. So the big picture, if you're advising viewers on what major point they want to take away and what we're looking toward, Rob, I'll go to you first.
I will. Let me take that. Can I use that to answer the question about the testing, if
Go
that's
ahead.
okay? Because I think everyone else can have more pertinent points than I about the other things. So I think it's important to remember that you can measure someone with virus early on, several days before they become infectious, possibly. Then it ramps up, and then there's a period of time and it comes down. And what you're looking for is to catch someone in that 1 or 2 day window where they have measurable virus, but before they have symptoms. And so even though that CNN article that was mentioned talks about if you are an individual person, and you get a positive test, you don't necessarily know how to interpret it. For the purposes of what we're talking about, which is catching people in this window where they are infectious but don't really realize it yet, that testing can be very impactful. And I think there is a real role for it to play. You do need to test frequently. And the window for a molecular test is probably about 24 to 48 hours. So your test needs to be the day of or the day before if you're talking about fans coming into your arena. With the antigen test, you need a higher level of infectivity to catch it. So your window becomes very narrow. It's really like point of care where you're doing that. And we could get into the sensitivity and specificities if we had time, but that's my fast answer to the question that was asked about that.
So Jim, I'll turn to you next. Rob probably stole your thunder on the sensitivity and specificity of molecular tests, but I'll let you give the key points you'd like to make.
Yeah, shucks, right? Listen, I think what I would say is, though it's important and everything seems to be COVID-19 in our lives and every single day. Remove your blinders, please. Don't just think that as a stadium operator or an arena operator or an event operator, that all you have to do is worry about COVID-19 stuff, because all the other things are still taking place. You're going to still have medical recalls, heart attacks are going to happen, slips and falls are going to take place. You're going to have people that disagree with the outcome of the game, and people are going to fight, or you're going to have disagreements, and you're just going to have freak accidents. And so what I would say to you is just be mindful of the fact that you need to be as well-rounded an individual and operator as you can. Fit COVID into your operational planning and your security operations plans, but be mindful of the fact that all of those other things we got to worry about every day are still going to take place.
Great point and great advice. Jeff, I'll turn to you.
You bet. I think I would leave you with the thought that as you sit there today and you haven't opened your facility and brought folks back, it's a very, very, very daunting task. And it seems like the board is always moving and always changing. And just when you feel like you've got an answer to something, the science changes and everything you did now has to be reworked. It's a very daunting task, but let me tell you, with good communication and a good team and a good plan and being nimble and flexible, I'm living and breathing proof that you can reopen your facility safely and you can operate safely. We're by no means out of the woods, and I don't want to imply that. But I think that we've had some successes, and we've been very fortunate in some of the things that we've done and had to deal with, and we continue to strive to hit that mark every day. And so don't let the daunting thought of the task ahead of you to open your facilities and have people back get you to the point that you don't think you can do this. It can be done, and it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of teamwork. And a lot of being nimble and flexible and communicating, and that positive outlook that you can get it done. Because Jim's exactly right. Everything else we always did is still there as well. So just keep working at it. It can be done. And I'm living and breathing proof.
Great, thanks. And Joe, the final point.
First, I would like to say we are rooting for every single one of you guys that are opening venues and are getting asses in seats and putting fans in the stands. We're rooting for you, all of us, regardless of what part of the world you live in. I just spent 3 weeks in Doha in Qatar, and I've been all around the country, and I can tell you we are rooting for you. So keep doing it. Show us the way, because every time you chalk up a victory and put a notch in your headboard, it's good for all of us. I would say that when you're opening these venues, don't forget about your audience. Don't forget about the employees. Don't forget about the people. Put yourself in their shoes and what they're experiencing and what they're going through as you are planning to open this up. If you can't find the gate, know that your fans and their people can't find the gate. If you think it's too confusing for a map or your signage, then it's too confusing for them. Put yourself in their shoes. Take a practical and pragmatic approach and use the facts. And sometimes the facts are the scientific facts. Sometimes the damn facts are what Jeff Steele's doing at Jordan-Hare. Sometimes it's what Jim's doing at Levi Stadium. Sometimes it's what they're doing in Miami, Florida. But use those facts and use your resources, and let's get this damn industry back open.
Great. Thanks very much. And as we close, I really want to thank the panelists. This has been a great panel who really have some unique insights and some really tough challenges that COVID-19 has thrown at us in the sports and entertainment industry. On behalf of the Innovation Institute for Fan Experience and Aveshka, I thank you all for joining us and thank everybody for tuning in. Please join IIFX and other sports and entertainment fans and professionals as we build a path to return, work, play, and spectate. For more information, you can go to iifx.org. As I mentioned at the beginning, we'd like to continue to hear from you, and we'll plan other sessions. Looking forward to an active session next week. And don't forget to subscribe to our Return to Work, Play, and Spectate podcast for more informative discussions. And be sure to follow us on social media at IIFX_global. Thanks very much for joining us, and have a great day and stay safe. Thank you.
you.